Hello, my name is Roger Berkowitz, and I'm the founder and academic director of the Hannah Arendt Center at Bard College. Welcome to the lectures of the Virtual Reading Group series. We are today continuing to read The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt, and we are in the last section of the book on totalitarianism, Chapter 11, The Totalitarian Movement. This chapter is broken into two parts. The first is on totalitarian propaganda, and the second is on totalitarian organization. These are, as she will say, two sides of the same coin, how the movement organizes and moves people. Remember that from page 323 in the last chapter, Arendt defines totalitarian movements as mass organizations of atomized, isolated individuals. Here we are going to understand what she means by organizations and movements as organizations. And the two things that will turn movements into organizations are propaganda and then the organization element of movements, and that's what this chapter is about. So the first part on propaganda begins with this familiar idea of hers that the masses have emerged from the breakdown of classes and traditions of society, and that the masses have a great desire to escape reality, a longing, as she says, for a completely consistent, comprehensible, and predictable world. What they most want is to be part of something meaningful, part of a Reich or a world or a movement that will prove to them that they're on the winning side of history or that their life has a purpose. And so victory and the victory of the movement is more important than what the actual movement is. So she can write on page 350 to 351, for masses, in contrast to classes, want victory and success as such, in their most abstract form. More important than the cause that may be victorious or the particular enterprise that may be a success is the victory no matter what cause and success no matter what enterprise. One of the things she'll say in a later book on Eichmann in Jerusalem, is that Eichmann was a convinced Nazi, but he was a convinced Nazi in the sense that he wanted to be a Nazi, and he was willing to embrace the Nazi ideology no matter what it was. He was an anti-Semite. She never says he wasn't, although some people continue to say such a thing. But his anti-Semitism was not something that came from him so much as it was part of the movement that he found his meaning and purpose in. And what he cared about more than anything was the victory of the Nazi cause. And because of that, he was willing to go along with the final solution. This kind of propaganda of claiming and articulating a victory, a victorious and successful movement, often takes the form of a prophecy of infallibility, and thus one that speaks of the future. So Hitler could say something along the lines that the Jewish financiers are hurling people into a war that will lead to annihilation, and the people hear that, and it's translated as, I intend to make a war and kill all the Jews. And the way to turn that prophecy, that propaganda, into a success, into a victory, is to start a war and kill all the Jews. And if you can do that, your movement has an aura of success to it, and thus meaning. It can lend meaning to a people. This actually is a core part of her idea of the Nazi use of anti-Semitism. So on page 356, she can write, Nazi propaganda was ingenious enough to transform anti-Semitism into a principle of self-definition, and thus eliminate it from the fluctuations of mere opinion. This is a fascinating point, right? Anti-Semitism becomes not a mere opinion, and it's not about the Jews. It's about the self-definition of the Nazis. It becomes a statement of who we are as Nazis. And she continues, it used the persuasion of mass demagoguery, namely Nazi propaganda used the persuasion of mass demagoguery, only as a preparatory step and never overestimated its lasting influence, whether in oratory or in print. This gave the masses of atomized, undefinable, unstable, and futile individuals a means of self-definition and identification, which not only restored some of the self-respect they had formerly derived from their function in society, but also created a kind of spurious stability, which made them better candidates for organization. This is the key move in this chapter, that if Nazi propaganda used anti-Semitism to give a sense of self-identification and to, in a sense, restore self-respect from people who had lost their purpose from being a member of a class or a religion or a tradition or of a people, and give them a sense of respectability and stability, those people clung to that self-identity, clung to that idea of themselves as members of the Nazi Party. And in doing so, were uniquely susceptible to being organized by the Nazi Party. In this attempt to organize them, one of the key steps is separating them from the world. Why is that? Because the world not only is confusing, but offers offers truth, reality, and thus can damage or challenge their self-affirmation, their self-definition. And so one thing we have to do is isolate them, and allow them to escape reality. And so on pages 351 to 353, Arendt has some of the most important and really deeply disturbing passages in the book about the way that totalitarian propaganda separates the people it's aimed at from the real world, and how they desperately want that. So on 351, she says, or 353, she says, the masses' escape from reality is a verdict against the world in which they are forced to live, and in which they cannot exist, since coincidence has become its supreme master, and human beings need the constant transformation of chaotic and accidental conditions into a man-made pattern of relative consistency. Before they seize power and establish a world according to their doctrines, totalitarian movements conjure up a lying world of consistency, which is more adequate to the needs of the human mind than reality itself. This is a point we've talked about in numerous of our sessions, in many of our sessions, but it's absolutely central that the masses need to escape reality, which is a challenge to them and who they are. And what they need is a lying world of consistency. And that's what totalitarian movements offer. What convinces the masses of this lying world are not facts. And this is really important, and it's important in our day and age as well. She says on page 351, what convinces the masses are not facts, and not even invented facts, but only the consistency of the system of which they are presumably part. What the masses refuse to recognize is the fortuitousness that pervades reality. They are predisposed to all ideologies because they explain facts as mere examples of laws and eliminate coincidences by inventing an all-embracing omnipotence, which is supposed to be at the root of every accident. Totalitarian propaganda thrives on this escape from reality into fiction, from coincidence into consistency. And this is the key. Consistency is not based on facts. It's based on a story, on purposes, Later in the chapter on page 385, she's going to say that the great talent of the elite formations of totalitarian movements is to dissolve all statements of facts into statements of purposes. And that's an essentially difficult and yet powerful move, because what you can then say is, look, if I say a fact and you say it's a lie, I say the fact's not important. It was a fact. We see this just this week when the press secretary says, well, what the president said was not a fact, it was simply a purpose. And this is what's happening in the defactualization of the world. We turn facts into purposes. We turn them into a story of a consistent worldview. And thus, alternate facts or lies become ways to dissolve all facts, dissolve the claim of factuality, and allow us to live in a world of purposes as opposed to facts. The second, and at the end of this chapter, as we move into the next section on totalitarian organization, she gives an example of the Nazis and the Soviets and their forms of organization. And she writes, quote, this is on page 361 to 362. It is no accident that the two totalitarian movements of our time, so frightfully new in methods of rule and ingenious in forms of organization, have never preached a new doctrine, have never invented an ideology which was not already popular. Not the passing successes of demagogy win the masses, but the visible reality and power of living organization. Hitler's brilliant gifts as a mass orator did not win him his position in the movement, but rather misled his opponents into underestimating him as a simple demagogue, and Stalin was able to defeat the great orator of the Russian Revolution, namely Trotsky. What distinguishes the totalitarian leaders and dictators is rather the often simple-minded and single-minded purposefulness with which they choose those elements from existing ideologies which are best fitted to become the fundaments of another entirely fictitious world. And this is what totalitarian movements do. They don't provide ideologies per se. I mean, they do, but it's not that important which one. What they're able to do is purposefully and single-mindedly turn needy people towards the world, the fictitious world, that will allow them to organize and manipulate these people. And thus the second part of the book, of the chapter 11, starts by offering 5 modes by which totalitarian movements organize these people. The first, she says, is that they provide a wall between the party members and the outside world. So that the party members are sort of cordoned off and never actually have to deal with people who don't agree with the movement's goals. She writes on page 367, the fellow travelers organization. So that these are the sympathizers. They're not. So there's the party movement, there's the sympathizers or fellow travelers, and then there's the non-totalitarian world. The fellow travelers organization surround the totalitarian movements with a mist of normality and respectability that fools the membership about the character of the outside world as much as it does the outside world about the true character of the movement. The front organization functions both ways, as the facade of the totalitarian movement to the non-totalitarian world, and as the facade of this world to the inner hierarchy of the movement. So this is the first way that we organize the party and the movement. We isolate them from the non-totalitarian world, and the buffer is sort of the supporters who are not yet part of the movement. The second is that we create what she calls a fluctuating hierarchy on different levels. And she talks about how there's the party members, then there's the SA, then the SS, and these different, each one of these hierarchies both faces in towards the party and out towards the next group, which insulates it from the next group and the next group and the next group. And this is part of what she calls the organizational power of totalitarian movements. The third is what she calls the technique of duplication, namely that you duplicate different institutions and bureaucracies such that if you have a teachers union here and then you create another teachers union, which one actually represents the teachers? Well, both. And then whichever one is more loyal to the party at this point, we support them and we push them up. And then if they get too independent, we can support the other organization. And we use that to, in a sense, undermine the status quo, undermine any independent power bases that might exist. And all power comes from the respect of and the support of the leader or the highest echelons of the party. The fourth mode of organization that totalitarianism uses is the leader himself. And Arendt says on page 373, quote, "In the center of the movement, as the motor that swings it into motion, sits the leader. He is separated from the elite formation by an inner circle of the initiated who spread around him an aura of impenetrable mystery, which corresponds to his intangible preponderance." Okay, some big words, but what she means is that the leader sits there and is protected from everyone else by an inner circle. He has this aura about him of mystery. He constantly changes his personnel because he demands that people never become independent. There can't be any independent power sources. He wins absolute loyalty because loyalty is the only thing that will allow you to keep your job and possibly your life. And then the fifth mode of organization that she talks about is that these organizations are like secret societies. She says they're secret societies in broad daylight. And they even advertise their goals, even though they're secret societies. And so on 381, she says, quote, "From the viewpoint of an organization which functions according to the principle that whoever is not included is excluded, whoever is not with me is against me, the world at large loses all nuances, differentiations, and pluralistic aspects which had in any event become confusing and unbearable to the masses, who had lost their place and their orientation in it. What inspired them with the unwavering loyalty of members of secret societies was not so much the secret as the dichotomy between us and all others." So they became modeled on and like secret societies, but it wasn't the secret that defined the secret society. It was that we were an us and not a them. And then she continues on 382, and she writes, "The chief value, however, of the secret or conspiracy societies' organizational structure and moral standards for purpose of mass organization is in their unsurpassed capacity to establish and safeguard the fictitious world through consistent lying." So again, all of these are modes of organization for totalitarian movements. And what they all do is isolate the movement from the real world, from the non-totalitarian world, and in different ways by destabilizing independent power sources that could challenge our fictional lie, our fictional world, so duplication, and the leader principle, and by the facade organizations, so keeping people faced in the right direction, and by this conspiracy society element. What they're trying to do is safeguard the fictitious world that the movement needs and creates. And that is very much the way organization works. And if you safeguard this world and you keep it alive, you're able to manipulate people and move them in the way you want. She calls this a tremendous machine upon which the falsehoods of totalitarian movements depends. And she then summarizes and says there are four parts of it. There's the leader, there's the sympathizers, there's the party members, and then there's the elite formations. And each one is in different relation to the leader. So the leader is this one man who has all the power. The sympathizers, who are not the party members but sort of outside it, they generally believe the leader. They believe the propaganda. The party members don't believe the leader when he does things. So, for example, when Hitler took a loyalty oath before the Supreme Court, she says the sympathizers believed he was being loyal to the state, but the party members didn't. And they took great solace. They were made happy in their intelligence and trust that they knew that the propaganda was a lie. But the party members, she thinks, still believe in the standard cliches and the ideologies of the party. After the sympathizers and the party members, there's the elite formations. And these are the people who really keep things moving. And she says on page 385, and I think one of the most chilling passages of the book, quote, "The elite formations are distinguished from the ordinary party membership in that they do not need such demonstrations and are not even supposed to believe in the literal truth of ideological cliches. These are fabricated to answer a quest for truth among the masses, which in its insistence on explanation and demonstration still has much in common with the normal world. The elite is not composed of ideologists. Its members' whole education is aimed at abolishing their capacity for distinguishing between truth and falsehood, and between reality and fiction." And now pay attention here. Their superiority, the elite's superiority, consists in their ability immediately to dissolve every statement of fact into a declaration of purpose. They take a fact and say the fact is not a fact. It's a statement of intention, of purpose. When the president says my inauguration was the biggest and it's a lie, who cares? It's a purpose, and the purpose says I'm legitimate and I'm great. When the president says that the former president wiretapped him, we say it's a lie. And he says it's not a lie. It's a statement of purpose. I'm aggrieved. People are after me. I can state things. I can say things. I can dissolve the reality between fiction and reality, because I'm not speaking facts. Facts are irrelevant. What matters is purposes. And what the totalitarian movement does is create a lying reality, a fictional reality that can't be penetrated. Because when they lie and people say, but these are lies, the internal movement, the party movement, the sympathizers say, we don't care if it's a lie. What matters is it serves the purpose. And that allows totalitarian movements to be organized in a radical, fictional, non-real way. And that's why on 387 she can write, "It is this freedom from the content of their ideologies which characterizes the highest rank of the totalitarian hierarchy. These men consider everything in terms of organization." It doesn't matter what the ideology is. It doesn't matter what the facts are. What matters is organizing people towards ends. And that's what totalitarian movements succeed at doing. I look forward to talking with you about these chapters. Thank you very much.